Detroit spent decades building some of the most powerful front-engine muscle cars on Earth. And then in 1960, somebody at General Motors looked at that entire philosophy and decided to flip it backwards. Literally, an engine behind the driver, 2 seats, a lightweight fiberglass body, and a price tag under $3,000. This was the Chevrolet Corvair Monza GT, and almost nobody remembers it existed. That's not an exaggeration. While the Corvette was becoming an American icon, and the Mustang was about to rewrite the pony car rulebook, Chevrolet's engineers were quietly building a mid-engine sports car that shared almost nothing with anything else coming out of Detroit. It had 4-wheel independent suspension, when most American cars were still riding on solid rear axles. It used a rear-mounted aluminum flat 6 when every other performance car in the General Motors lineup was shoving cast-iron V8 engines as far forward as physics allowed. And it looked like it had been designed in Italy, not Michigan. The Monza GT wasn't a concept car in the traditional sense. It was a fully functional prototype that Chevrolet built, tested, and seriously considered putting into production. They built it. They drove it. They showed it to the public. And then they killed it. What happened between those 3 steps is one of the strangest stories in American automotive history. To understand where this thing came from, you need to go back to 1960 and meet the Corvair itself. The standard production Corvair, not the GT. Chevrolet launched it as their answer to the Volkswagen Beetle, which was selling in terrifying numbers to Americans who wanted small, fuel-efficient transportation. The Big Three were genuinely worried. Ford responded with the Falcon, a conventional front-engine economy car. Chrysler mostly ignored the problem. But Chevrolet's lead engineer, Ed Cole, decided to do something legitimately weird. He designed a rear-engine car with an air-cooled flat 6 made of aluminum. The Corvair was unconventional from the day it launched. Rear weight bias, swing axle rear suspension, no radiator, pancake engine sitting behind the rear wheels. Handling was tricky if you did not know what you were doing, but the car had a lightweight charm and decent performance for what it was. More importantly, it had something no other American economy car could claim. It was interesting. Enthusiasts noticed. By 1960, General Motors design staff noticed something else. That rear engine layout, the one they had built for economy and practicality, had sports car potential. Put a more powerful version of that aluminum 6 in the back, wrap it in a low-slung body, add proper suspension tuning, and you would have something genuinely quick, something European in philosophy, but American in execution. The idea was not coming from accountants trying to save money. It was coming from designers and engineers who saw an opportunity. Larry Shinoda was one of those designers. He had worked on the 1963 Corvette Stingray split-window coupe, one of the most striking American car designs of the decade. In 1962, Shinoda and his team started sketching what a Corvair-based sports car might look like. The result was the Monza GT. It debuted at the 1962 New York Auto Show, and the reaction was immediate. People could not believe Chevrolet had built it. The body was pure Italian roadster. Low nose, fastback roofline, minimal overhangs, aggressive fender bulges. It looked like something Pininfarina might sketch for Ferrari, not something you would expect to roll out of a General Motors studio. The proportions worked because the rear engine layout freed up the front end entirely. No engine to package, no radiator to cool, just sleek fiberglass curves and hidden headlights. The wheelbase was 92 inches. The entire car weighed 1,950 pounds. For context, a 1962 Corvette weighed 2,900 pounds. Under that fiberglass skin sat a tuned version of the Corvair's flat 6. Displacing 145 cubic inches, the engine was fitted with twin turbochargers. Yes, turbochargers. In 1962, American production cars would not see factory turbocharging until the Oldsmobile Jetfire later that same year, and even then, it was a single turbo on an oddball V8. The Monza GT had two of them feeding a rear-mounted six-cylinder, and the claimed output was 150 horsepower. That does not sound like much now, but in a car weighing under 2,000 pounds, it was enough to genuinely move. The suspension was fully independent at all four corners, something the production Corvair already had, but most American cars did not. Shinoda's team tuned it aggressively. Stiffer springs, revised geometry, wider track. The swing axle setup that would later become infamous on production Corvairs was carefully managed here. Engineers knew the limitations and compensated. This was not a parts bin special. It was a ground-up sports car that happened to share an engine family with an economy car. Chevrolet built a second version in 1963 called the Monza SS. This one ditched the fastback roofline for a full roadster treatment with a small racing windscreen. The engine stayed in the same place, but output climbed to 164 horsepower. The car ran at Elkhart Lakes Road America circuit with driver Bob Bondurant behind the wheel, and it didn't embarrass itself. It proved the concept worked on track, not just in a showroom. So didn't it happen? Why didn't Chevrolet take this lightweight, mid-engine turbocharged sports car and put it into production? The answer involves lawyers, a book, and one of the most famous automotive controversies of the 1960s. But before we get there, you need to understand just how close this actually came to being real. Because the Monza GT wasn't just a design exercise. Chevrolet had production plans, cost estimates, and serious internal momentum behind it. They weren't daydreaming. They were engineering a business case. And for a brief moment, it looked like it might actually work. In 1964, Chevrolet's advanced studio had detailed production drawings ready. The proposed car was called the Corvair Super Spider. It would use the Monza GT's basic architecture, softened slightly for street use. The twin-turbo flat six was real. The independent suspension was proven. The fiberglass body tooling was feasible. They had supplier quotes and preliminary pricing targets. But something else was happening in 1964 that would change everything. A young lawyer named Ralph Nader was researching automotive safety. His focus zeroed in on the Corvair's handling characteristics, specifically the rear swing axle suspension design that could cause sudden oversteer in extreme situations. Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, would not publish until November 1965, but the research and the reputation were building throughout 1964. Word travels fast inside the auto industry. General Motors' legal department started getting nervous. The Corvair was already controversial among safety advocates. Launching an even more aggressive rear-engine sports car based on that same platform seemed like corporate suicide. The optics were terrible. Picture the headlines. General Motors launches a high-performance version of an unsafe car. So the program stalled. Not officially canceled, just quietly shelved. Engineers were reassigned. The prototypes went into storage. The tooling quotes expired. By 1966, when Nader's book finally hit shelves and ignited a firestorm of congressional hearings, the decision looked prescient. Chevrolet had dodged a public relations disaster by killing a car most people never knew existed. But the engineering didn't disappear. It migrated. In 1968, Chevrolet introduced the Corvette C3 with styling cues that looked suspiciously familiar to anyone who remembered the Monza GT. Larry Shinoda had moved over to the Corvette program, and his design language came with him. The long hood, the fastback roofline, the aggressive haunches, they all echoed what he had sketched for that rear-engine prototype 6 years earlier. The mid-engine sports car concept itself refused to die at GM. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, Chevrolet kept building mid-engine prototypes. They built the Aerovette in 1973, and they developed various iterations of projects that would decades later be linked to the C8 concept before the actual C8 Corvette launched. That original Monza GT established something inside GM's institutional memory: the idea that an American mid-engine sports car could work, that it could be beautiful, and that people would actually want it. Europe had already proven the layout. Ferrari's 246 Dino, launched in 1969, used a mid-mounted V6 and became an icon. Lamborghini's Miura had arrived in 1966 with a transverse V12 behind the driver. Porsche would introduce the 914 in 1969, a mid-engine collaboration with Volkswagen that brought the layout to a broader market. The technology was not exotic anymore. It was proven. Detroit just needed the courage to build it. That courage finally arrived in 2020. The C8 Corvette, 58 years after the Monza GT debuted, finally gave America its mid-engine sports car. Different execution, different era, completely different market. But the lineage is there. The engineers who worked on early C8 prototypes in the 2000s knew the history. They had seen the archival photos of Shinoda's Monza GT. Some had even tracked down the original prototype, which still existed in GM's heritage collection. What the Monza GT proved was simple. It showed that American designers and engineers could think beyond the accepted formula. Rear engine and mid-engine layouts were not just European eccentricities. A Chevrolet sports car did not have to follow the front-engine rear-drive template that had defined American performance since the 1950s. The Corvair itself lived until 1969, never escaping the shadow of Nader's criticism, despite significant suspension improvements in later years. The swing axle was replaced with a fully independent setup in 1965 that genuinely fixed the handling issues. But public perception had already shifted. Sales collapsed. Production ended quietly, and the Corvair became a cautionary tale about safety, litigation, and corporate responsibility. But buried inside that story was another narrative. One about a twin-turbocharged rear-engine lightweight sports car that nearly made it to production. A machine that would have completely redefined what people expected from Chevrolet in 1964. It would have beaten the Dino to market. It would have arrived before the 914, before the Fiat X19, before any affordable mid-engine car existed in the American market. The tooling costs would have been high. The market was unproven. The legal risk was significant. All of those things were real, and any one of them could justify the decision to kill the program. But the fact remains that Chevrolet had the design, had the engineering, and had the will to build something genuinely radical. They came within months of committing. Then the ground shifted, and the moment passed. That is what makes the Monza GT fascinating. Not what it was, but what it almost became. The production Corvair Super Spider exists only in engineering drawings and cost estimates. The alternate timeline where American buyers in 1965 could walk into a Chevrolet dealer and drive home in a turbocharged mid-engine sports car for a fraction of what a Corvette cost. Larry Shinoda's sketches still exist. The prototypes still exist. The engineering data is archived. Somewhere in GM's records is a complete production plan for a car that would have changed everything. It just needed one different decision at one critical moment. The Monza GT remains the most important Chevrolet that never was. And every time a C8 Corvette launches from a stoplight with its engine behind the driver, it is finishing a conversation that started in 1962. The question is not whether GM made the right call killing the Monza GT. Given the legal climate and the Corvair's reputation, they probably did. The question is what we lost when that decision was made. A generation of American drivers never got to experience what a lightweight, affordable, mid-engine Chevrolet felt like. They never got to see whether the concept would have worked in the market, whether it would have pushed competitors to respond, whether it might have established an entirely different branch of American performance culture decades earlier. That alternate history does not exist. What exists instead is a handful of prototypes, some archived drawings, and the knowledge that American engineers were capable of this kind of thinking in 1962. They just were not allowed to follow through. The Monza GT proved the concept was viable. The C8 Corvette, arriving 58 years later, proved the market was ready. Everything in between was just waiting.